Hey, y'all, welcome to Crosspolitic One-on-One with the Water Boy. It's good to be with you. It's fun to have a little time today with David Reece and David Wiley. I'll be bringing them here in a minute. But before we get there, I got two events that I want to make you aware of. First, our national conferences. The topic is Holy Wars this year. Holy Wars. Yeah, interesting topic, but the more you think about it with Minneapolis and everything that's going on, maybe it's even more and more important as we go along. But are you ready for the Fight, Laugh, Feast Conference 2026? This year, we're going to be in the Nashville area. And this year's theme, something you don't want to miss, is Holy Wars, Just Wars, the Crusades, and the Christian life. As usual, this isn't your typical conference. Why would we do that? We're tackling the questions others won't touch. What does Scripture actually say about war? Were the Crusades justified? How do we live faithfully as Christian men in a world hostile to the truth? Of course, we're kicking off our conference Thursday night with beer and psalms, then diving into 2 days of fearless speakers with, including, of course, Pastor Doug Wilson, Pastor Joe Rigney, Pastor Toby Sumter, Dr. Ben Merkel, Pastor Longshore, and more. We haven't even finished it all off. Then Pastor George Grant, too. More speakers to be announced. Join thousands of Christians in the Nashville area this October 1st, 2nd, and 3rd for psalm singing fellowship and teaching that won't pull punches. Again, go to fightlaughfeast.com, click on the national conference, sign up. It's October 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in the Nashville area, and we hope to see you there. The second event, we got actually a couple events coming up in the next coming months that we're going to be talking about, but the second event is our my national business makers conference. Jesus is Lord over everything, including politics, health, and especially your workplace. More than ever, we need strong Christians running businesses with conviction. That's exactly what the Business Makers Network is all about. A place for Christian business leaders and Christian business makers who refuse to compartmentalize their faith. And this year, we're hosting our first ever national conference, Risk, Build, Grow, the business of work and wisdom of making money. That's April 7th, 8th, and 9th at Lake Point Church in Dallas, Texas. Yes, the promised land, Dallas, Texas in April. You'll hear from speakers like Charlton, Eric Reed, Brett Craig, C.R. Wiley, Gabe Wrench, and I got many more we're bringing down to this business conference. Whether you're launching a startup, leading in corporate America, or trying to align your career with your faith, this conference will challenge you to maximize your impact. Apply Christ fully to your work and join the movement of courageous Christian business leaders for the good of our people and the glory of God. Again, April 7th, 8th, and 9th in Dallas, Texas. Register now at businessmakers.network. That's businessmakers.network. Click on event, and you can obviously take it from there. We look forward to seeing hundreds, maybe even 1,000 business leaders in Dallas, Fort Worth in April. So stay tuned, and hope to see you in Dallas there. So with that said, okay, I got a little intro here. I got two guests coming on. You guys of course are familiar with David Reece. He's a good old hat to our network and to our show. And then we got he's CEO and he's a pastor. And so let's go ahead and welcome David Reece in. David, of course, thank you for joining us. Appreciate you coming on again, Mr. Reece.
Thanks for having me on. It's an honor to be here. I'm looking forward to talking about the topic.
And I got another David, David Wiley. He wrote a book, actually got it with me right here. He wrote a book called New and Ancient Justice, Victory Over Totalitarianism. So this is David Wiley. He's also owner of the Wiley Companies. And so David, he goes back to kind of the Rushdoony. He's an old school reconstructionist, if that's fair to say. But please welcome David Wiley. Thank you for coming to the show.
Well, I'm honored to be here, and I'm very, very pleased to be able to talk about this subject matter. So thank you for your invitation.
Well, great. Well,
and I hope we all have a good time.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And the reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you guys, I want to talk about usury versus interest, or usury versus what I would call lawful biblical interest, is because a couple weeks ago, I don't even know if it was a couple weeks ago, maybe it was last week, I got in a little Twitter war. President Trump, when he tweets, sometimes he thinks it becomes law almost automatically, or he thinks it's going to be law. And he tweeted out a couple weeks ago that he said that I'm going to apply a 1-year cap on credit card interest rates of 10% effective January 2026. That was a tweet. It was not a law. And so sometimes he tweets like it becomes law, but it's not. But I actually retweeted it, and I said it's not the government's job to dictate free market exchanges. And that, I know I was picking on kind of a dumb issue. Credit card rates can be up to 30%, that kind of stuff. But ultimately, the basic principle is that the government cannot ultimately dictate private property. That would be the foundation of where I'm going at with that tweet. But it went off, and a bunch of people actually came at me and said I was defending usury, which I wasn't. And then they defended that what was funny was they come after me because they're basically saying credit card companies are usury. And then they came and also defended President Trump for lowering usury, as they would define it, or as they were trying to castigate me with, as that 10% rate was a good thing that President Trump did. But if they're against usury, they should be against all rates, all credit card interest rates, if that's the thing that was going on. So the argument was a little silly to me, but I think the discussion that we're about to have is a good discussion and a helpful discussion. So I'm just going to lay out just really a breakdown of how I think about this. It's not complicated to me, and how I break this down. I believe that usury should be a legal thing that the government deals with. I believe that usury is biblical in the sense that the idea of usury is a biblical concept that we should be against, if that makes sense, what I just said there. I believe biblical lawful interest is a distinct thing from usury. When most of the time when you see usury being used, interest being talked about in the scriptures, it's almost always talking about taking care of the poor, not loaning money for interest or for profit for basic needs of the poor. That's the gist. That's the gist summary. And I know there's a couple of verses that'll complicate what I just said there. I believe that there is a place for biblical lawful interest, and you see that in texts like Matthew 25, where Jesus is talking about the parable of the talents and the ROI he expects from the parable of the talents and so forth. So I just want to set that up. So Mr. Wiley, Mr. Reece, you guys have something to bounce off of, and as we get into this conversation. And so since Mr. Wiley, you're new to the show, I'm gonna let you go first, and basically just would love to kind of hear maybe at this point just kind of your summary of how you think about usury. Is there a category that I brought into this? Is there a biblical lawful interest category in this or not? And would love to hear your kind of summary of the topic so far.
Okay, well, philosophers teach that the conclusion is contained in your premise. And if you presuppose that there is such a thing as lawful interest, then you won't consider usury to be a theft, and you have to you have to come up with a definition for when it's lawful and when it's not lawful. And since the matter of law is one that's determined by the scriptures, because it's God's law that we seek to obey, keep his commandments, and teach nations to do the same. Since we seek to be pleasing to God and to really honor his law and his commandments, it teach us to love him and love our neighbors. What we consider to be lawful is determined by scripture. So my question would be, if one assumes that there is such a thing as lawful interest, and if what the prophets say about unlawful interest is true, that like as I recounted what Ezekiel said, the one who takes usury shall surely not live. It's a very serious offense. How do we know the difference between what would be a mortal sin, if you will, and what would be perfectly normal and just fine? How would we know?
You want me to answer that question now?
Well, I'm not trying to control the interview. I'm just saying that is one of the fundamental questions. that we have to address. Is if it's a serious problem to lend expecting something in return, or to lend at usury, if that's a serious problem, we ought to know how to stay out of harm's way if there's any such thing as lawful interest. How would we stay out of harm's way?
Mm-hmm.
Would it be 10%, 12%,
Yeah.
50%, 1%? I think Nehemiah informs us pretty well that it's even 1%. So, in other words, there's no lawful usury.
Yeah, and I think we'll answer your question in a minute. Do you want to give any more kind of justification for your case for usury? All interest is wrong. Are you fine with what you started with there?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I think that the question about, or the topic called out, usury versus interest, is kind of I had trouble even relating to that because they're the same thing. It's not like usury is well defined and interest is well defined, and they're two different things. No, usury and interest, and Scott Mooney in his book in the introduction of Usury, Destroyer of Nations, starts out with the definition of terms. Most people don't know what usury is. They don't know what the Bible says it is. Yeah. And they think of you as interest to be something completely different. So that's all I have to say for now.
And I'll thanks. I got those questions in my mind, and we'll get to answering those. I want to give David Reece, Mr. Reece, bring you in, kind of maybe give me. I don't know where you stand, David. I don't know if you have a distinction like I do between usury and what I would call biblical lawful interest. I don't know where you stand on that, but would love to kind of hear your thoughts on the topic as you understand it according to scriptures.
Yeah, thank you. I believe that there are two categories. I believe there's business interest, and then there's interest on charity loans. And so I think that the sin of usury is taking interest on a charity loan. And so that we should take zero interest, no gain, no profit of any variety on loans that are given to a brother for his immediate relief. And so there are a number of things that we have a duty to give loans to our brothers on. And the list of those would include drink, food, clothing, making sure that they're able to have a place to sleep, shelter, medical aid in some sort of a situation, make it so they have enough to be able to keep the Sabbath and not starve. And then the idea that they could provide a Christian education to their children, and then to redeem them from slavery. These are things that we find. So, for example, our church has applied the idea of redemption from slavery to include when somebody has a high interest loan to some unbeliever or whatever, that there's the diaconal fund or private generosity, that you're redeeming your brother kind of out of an enslaving to unbelievers in those types of situations. So that's sort of when you have a duty. You can also choose to be generous and hospitable in ways that are beyond that, but those are not things where you're like obligated to help your brother when you have resourcing. The things that on that list are things where it's like, hey, if they're in need of those basic things, you need to be able to give of your excess there to your covenanted brother. And so then the idea of a business loan would be a taking of interest where you're lending money and you're making a deal, and it's sort of rent on money. And so the idea that there is interest itself is distinct from usury is something I'm obviously trying to argue. One of the basic premises that I would use to defend that would be Luke and Matthew, where the Lord Jesus Christ in the parable of the talents and minas argues for the wicked and lazy servant. The wicked and lazy servant seems to be making an anti-capitalist argument against investment. You reap where you haven't sown, and sort of saying, you gave me money and you expect to get returns off of places where you didn't do the work, which is often sort of the rhetoric you hear from people who argue against the ability to take income off of invested money. And so Jesus's response, well, the master who is in the parable's response is, you wicked and lazy servant, you ought to have at least deposited the money with the bankers so that I could have collected interest. And the word is tokos, which is the Greek term. You only find that in those two places. It's not anywhere else in the scripture. So The place that's normally translated as usury is typically a Hebrew word neshek, which could also be translated as biting. And it's all those verses. The most difficult verse to deal with is Deuteronomy 23, 19, and 20, because it doesn't have any context. It talks about poverty.
Yeah.
So all the other verses have the context of poverty.
That's right.
So Deuteronomy 23, 19, and 20, the question comes down to whether or not the word neshek by itself sort of carries that, or whether because of the other verses it sort of carries that. So you have verses that say it's lawful to lend at interest to foreigners and strangers, and so this idea that there is some category of person that is lawful to lend to at interest. The idea of the banker verse, and then you've got all these prohibitions on lending at interest to the brother, and the language that's used is even like profit. There's other words that are broader. Like in other words, like if I gave them food and made them pay me back more than the initial cost, and so I couldn't even like charge the retail rate. I have to charge them the cost I bought it at, right? As the charity loan, if I choose to not give it. So that's my understanding. So you've got the usury, you've got business loans, and even with business loans, the last qualifier I'd give is this: when you lend to a brother, there's this principle of Christian equity, or epikeia, is what William Perkins, he has a book on epikeia. And this idea that you have Christian moderation or equity that you apply. So when a person has a hard time covering it and they're a brother, even though it was an investment loan, that you have a duty of dealing with them reasonably if they're trying. And that a court, the civil magistrate's role would be to provide what's called equitable relief, which is a common law effort to apply the general equity. And so I would say that that applies between brothers, the principle of equitable relief, where you're trying to deal reasonably with them when they're acting in good faith. So that's my effort to summarize sort of holistically how I understand it.
I got a question. I've been thinking about this because this is part of why I'm trying to draw a distinction between usury or some sort of lawful interest, or what I would call usury versus some sort of just profitability with your private property. So what I mean by that is, maybe there's a difference. Maybe you guys can draw this out, but God gave me money to be a steward of. Let's say I got $1,000 and someone wants to borrow $1,000 so they can invest in their company, or they're wanting to do some sort of business venture with it. And of course, I loan them the $1,000. I want to see a ROI on that loan that I give them, just like the good stewards in Matthew 25. And how is that any different, or how is that different? Let's say I have a lawn mowing rental business where instead of loaning my money to them, I loan them a lawnmower, and then they go make money off it because they're trying to invest it in their own business and stuff. And I make money off loaning my private property to them, and they pay me some sort of basically interest on the mower that I loan to them, or some sort of profit for me on the money that I loan to them. Just, is that a fair comparison, or is that I guess maybe show me where I might be wrong in that analogous kind of connection between what I'm calling really ultimately private property of my own money and making money off it, or private property of my own mower and making money off it. Would love, go ahead, David, Mr. Wiley.
Gabe, I guess one of the things that I would ask is, if you did make a business loan and you determined that, well, this person really wasn't needy and maybe he's not my brother, and you make all these kind of subjective determinations to justify your lending to him at some increase, how would you know before he uses the equipment, or before he starts a venture, capital venture, how would you know how much interest to charge him? Would it be 10%, 8%, 15%?
Yeah,
I mean, how would you know what your rightful demand would be? I mean, how would you even calculate that before a business is even profitable?
In the same way, you know how to calculate your own products and services at your company. So you make money off what you sell, and you learn about that, how much money you need to make over time based off the cost of production. and the cost of marketing and the cost of what it takes to take it to market. And then from there, you know how much you need to make off it to be able to run a productive company and for everyone to be able to live, to get paid. So the same way I loan out my mower or I loan out $1,000 over time, I would figure out the ROI that I would need to be able to make a living for my family off that business model.
Yeah, that's the popular way to look at it. Let me ask this question, if I can change the subject a little bit. Is there any amount of usury that would be a crime, would be a theft?
I think scriptures is clear that you can not charge any interest to any poor person who needs money for basic needs to, live.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this question then. If usury was at any amount was a crime, just grant me that as a thought experiment, who would ever loan money to a rich person? It wouldn't. It wouldn't.
Rich people borrow money all the time. I don't know.
Pardon?
I guess I don't understand that question. Rich people borrow money all the time.
Sure they do, but who would lend it if they didn't obtain usury from it? Who would be motivated to lend to somebody they could sell, as the faithful stewards did in the two passages we looked at, Matthew, Luke.
Yeah.
But one was minas and the other was talents.
Yeah.
But nobody would lend to rich people if they couldn't obtain some kind of increase from it.
Yeah.
They would just employ their capital and they'd sell it if they didn't need it and do something else and invest it in maybe crops or manufacturing or something, but they wouldn't.
Yeah.
They wouldn't lend to a rich person who didn't even need what they had. And nobody would do that. So why would the Bible even talk about, if usury at any rate, as Nehemiah teaches us, and as the law of God teaches us, I believe, at any rate, if usury is a crime, then there wouldn't be a market for lending to rich people.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's why I'm defining usury in the context that it's illegal, it's not biblical, it's a sin to loan money to the poor for those who need their basic needs met. And making money, nothing wrong with loaning the money but making money, charging interest in addition to the money you let them borrow is the sin.
Well, I say a crime is at stake here. It's not just a sin, but it's one that comes under the civil magistrate.
Yeah,
and
I'm fine with
it's
that.
One that requires restitution.
I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a crime.
And a sin. Sin and a crime, both.
Oh,
yeah.
Every crime is a sin, of course, but
Yeah.
some are adjudicated in an earthly
Yes.
court and some in a heavenly court.
Yes, sir.
And you want to stay out of both of them.
Yes, sir.
Well, yeah, I think there's a big hazard that you have if you start making subjective determinations about whether somebody's rich or poor, and you're engaging in some practice that in some cases is called a crime. I mean, how would you know how to draw that line? Would it just be your opinion about somebody's faith and they're a brother or they're not a brother, they aren't a true believer, or they need something, but no, they don't need something? I mean, do you relate to other crimes that way? I mean, things that are banned?
I guess what I'm hearing from you is that you don't believe my distinction is a biblical distinction.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah.
Okay. So
because the parable of the talents or the minas, neither of them teach what has been advanced here. And I explain these parables are not about how much usury you can charge, and they're not an appeal of the former thought about what usury was or money lending was. These parables are all about what the lazy steward thought of his master. He thought his master was a hard man and a thief, reaping where he did not sow. gathering where he scattered no seed. He
Right.
was a thief and an exploiter.
Yep.
And if that's what you think of God, then hey, if you think the master is a thief, hey, you should have given it to the banks.
Yeah.
They specialize in theft.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I mean, this parable, both these parables have been turned on their head by churches for about 300 years. Okay, and they've used it to justify usury, as if God actually commands this criminal behavior. And in other places in the Bible, there is no encouragement to engage in money lending. The church thought it was a mortal sin for 1,500 years.
Mm-hmm.
You could not get a Christian burial if you were a money lender, because you were considered to be among the damned.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was just, there was no argument about it until about 300 or 400 years ago. And then the church started to liberalize, and they started to try to redefine it. The word interest isn't in the Bible. It's translated that now because it's the same thing as usury, but
Sure.
It's
Sure.
not translated as interest as a biblical kind of interest. I don't even see that anywhere in the Bible. I wouldn't know if something is criminal, I want to stay a long way away from it. I don't want to make subjective judgments about whether this is really embezzlement or fraud or theft, or I borrowed it, but I didn't really mean to return it, or I don't want to get in that. I don't want to start being subjective. Justice has to be adjudicated based on evidence and witnesses, and not my subjective determination of who happens to be a brother.
Yeah,
it's blind to that.
Mr. Reece, do you have any thoughts about what Mr. Wiley's saying?
I would argue that as regards things like the lending of money, if you're lending to somebody and it turns out that they have communicated to you that they are in fact poor, that they in fact need it for their immediate relief, that they're a brother, that would give you a reason to not lend to them at interest, and so you would have a reason why that was immoral. I would suggest to you that as regards things like judging the action, similarly to killing a man, right? There are some times where you have a duty to kill a person, sometimes when you don't. A person breaks into your house at night, and you have a duty to defend yourself and your family. And so you have to evaluate the circumstances surrounding it, the evidentiary basis around that. And so your motives matter. You can't prove the motives because it's the secret intents of your heart. But you can kill a man where the circumstances are justified and your motives can be wrong, right? Like you could have bloodlust, kill a man in a situation that's justified, and in the court of heaven, the Lord will hold you responsible for that. And Jesus either paid for that sin or he didn't, depending on whether you've been given faith or not, right? And so there would be sort of that, but then there would be in the civil court still a determination about the circumstances surrounding regarding it, right? So what evidentiary base did you use for the choice to kill the man? So as regards this, I would actually make this determination, which sounds different from the two of you. I would say taking interest on business loans is neither crime nor sin. Taking interest on charity loans while sin is still not a crime. So I would make that assertion. And so I would say church courts are the ones that would have to judge a person. So to be a usurer could result in loss of good standing in a church, but I don't view it as a crime unless we're talking about defrauding people. So defrauding, I would give as a category, for example, if you're lying about the terms of the loan, if you're doing something to try to entrap in some way where there's a way where you're creating consequences that are there is a way to prey on people using false weights and measures, so to speak, in that, right? So I think that I understand, Mr. Wiley, you would perhaps view usury as a whole as a sort of defrauding, but I think you understand the distinction I'm trying to make, regardless of whether you agree with the categorization. So that would be my effort to posit that. And I have one piece of evidence that I would like to put forward as to why I think we have to read this way. When you look at, for example, the Leviticus 25, where it talks about not lending at interest to your brother who's in need, it talks about not doing that on money, not doing it on victuals, and not doing it as a profit. There's like 3 words, and the profit word seems to be so broad as to be like, when somebody's in need here and your brother, you give them the thing as a loan, and they should pay you back, but the requirement on what they pay back should be no more than sort of your cost. And if you charge more than the cost, then it becomes a profit-taking exercise. And so that would make almost any commercial transaction where you're taking a profit a thing that becomes sinful towards those who are your brother who's in immediate need. So I think the same problem determining who you can sell to profitably exists. And so I would posit that as it has to be an overcomable issue. This is not an unovercomable issue. And I would say that applies for the interest taking as well as for the selling at retail.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut in.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So, Mr. Reece, I very much appreciate your thinking this through. I agree with you. The example of, for instance, the sixth commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," does not mean that you can't kill people sometimes if you're properly positioned in war, in a godly war, or in defending your home. It's not a all-encompassing prohibition against taking another's life, but it has to be justified.
Yes, sir.
And the Bible spells out some pretty clear ways in which it can be justified, so that the person who takes another person's life can make a clear distinction of whether he's acting lawfully or not. And the Bible is very clear. With usury, the Bible's also clear. It does make an exception for certain exceptions for charging usury. And St. Ambrose characterized it this way: take usury from someone whose life you can take without sin. In other words, we're dealing with an enemy here. Okay, that's what St. Ambrose taught. And he said that's what that means. And so I agree with you that taking usury is okay in some circumstances, like putting the sword to men, women, and children in a whole city under certain circumstances might be justified, and it was commanded, and people were cursed if they didn't do what they were told when nations or a city's cup of iniquity was full. But these are very clear, I think very clear exceptions, so you can always know, and you could know in a court of law with evidence and witnesses whether the killing was justified, and you could know whether usury was justified. So in your contention that if I understood, that there is no such thing as usury being a crime, that it's a personal matter and it's subject only to personal judgment and not the rules of evidence. I reject that.
Church courts also.
Pardon?
And
church courts don't bear the sword. It's not a
Right.
crime. I'm talking about civil crimes here. I'm not talking about covetousness.
Do you find yourself turning on the news and feeling hopeless? Woke agendas, socialist mayors, inflation, the list goes on. But we can take a stand by supporting companies that believe what you believe and what I believe. It's important that we stick together more now than ever. And there has been one company willing to stand with you since 2012, and that is Patriot Mobile. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. So important. They offer the very best nationwide, from 4G to 5G to LTE on all their networks. In fact, they use the same towers as the major carriers. There's no difference. Patriot Mobile has service plans to fit any budget, and their 100% US-based customer service, which is fantastic, by the way, is more important than ever in terms of your relationship with your cell phone provider. Patriot Mobile shares your values and supports organizations fighting for religious freedom, your constitutional rights, the sanctity of life, and our veterans and first responder heroes. If you switch to Patriot Mobile now, use the discount code Crosspolitic. PatriotMobile.com/Crosspolitic. That is PatriotMobile.com/Crosspolitic. I would have to think further about the crime thing with David's point being brought up. I think there's things that God commanded that would fall under maybe some sort of civic ramification that wouldn't be a crime. or at least don't have criminal penalties associated with it. So, God commanded farmers, hey, leave some of your produce behind when you go through your fields. And he commanded that, and that was for the poor to come behind them and be able to get the food. But there's no civil penalty associated with that.
Right. I agree.
And so I think it would be wrong for a farmer to, take a second sweep through his property. But I wouldn't. I think there's no civil penalty for it.
Absolutely.
In the same way, I think we agree. In the same way, I'd have to think through the usury thing. I don't know in scriptures if I see a civil penalty for the usury thing. I think it's sin. I think it's it's a public sin. I could even maybe put it in the crime category, but it'd be one of those categorical things that God commands, but he associates no civil penalty to it, at least that I know in scripture.
Yeah. Well, let's go to Nehemiah chapter 5.
Okay.
The people in Nehemiah's day had come from Babylon, and they were very familiar with the practice of usury and money lending, as it has been called. And they got themselves in a tough situation where they had been borrowing and they were unable to pay.
Uh-huh.
And even Nehemiah confesses that he was engaged in the practice. And it wasn't until they got out the law with Ezra and read it, and they realized that they'd been committing a great evil. And so Nehemiah called the assembly together and read the law and repented and asked the people to give back even the 1% that they had taken. Now, there is no distinctions here. Nehemiah doesn't say, well, you got to give back even the 1% to poor people.
Mm-hmm.
There was a complete ban on taking any usury.
Yep.
And he made the people swear an oath that they would leave off this practice.
Uh-huh.
And of course, Jesus would have described this as lending freely, expect nothing in return.
Uh-huh.
But they swore an oath, and on pain of being expelled from the nation, physically thrown out of the nation, they took the oath and said, we'll not do it anymore. And this has been the Orthodox teaching of the Hebrews as well as the Christian church for a couple of thousand years, more, 2,500 years perhaps.
To me,
not even questioned until 300 or 400 years ago. Not even questioned.
But to me, this still falls on the category of like they're borrowing, loaning, taking loans on their houses, all for basic needs, they just got out of Babylon. They're rebuilding their society and their food structure or whatever, and it's so bad that they're even selling their brethren, like they're involved in a slave trade, selling their own brethren. And so that, to me, would still be consistent with the concept that usury is banned for helping those in need.
Oh,
it's
of
not,
course.
It's
of
not,
course it is that.
Yeah. But this is why I bring in the product in the lawnmower scenario, is because what I'm trying to do is I think there's a totally different category of using your money for profit and distinct category than using your money to make money off the poor who need basic needs to live. Because
sure,
if we're trying to argue that making money off your money is sinful and criminal,
it's criminal,
then everything you do with your money in your company to build your products, to make money off your products, it's the same thing. So I create a barbecue seasoning, and I take money and I invest it into the barbecue season. I buy my goods, I buy my products, I buy my salt, my pepper, my paprika. I buy all the materials. I buy the machine that dumps the material into my season shaker and everything, and then I take that and then I make money. I sell it at a price that I'm going to make money off on the market. That's the same experience of taking your $1,000 and using it to make money off in the market for someone to borrow, someone to use, someone to rent my lawnmower to mow, so they can go out and start their own mowing business. And yeah, they owe me money for borrowing my mower. That's the same transaction. So to me, it's like, to argue to that extent means that anybody who's trying to make any sort of profit off any goods and services that they have is it would be in that same category of sin and a crime.
Well, before I jump in, I'd be interested to hear what Mr. Reece says.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think I would say that I do think that they're functionally the same thing, charging a profit or charging interest on money. I think both are charging for the use. So with profit for a sale, you're paying for the transfer of title, right? And with rents, you're paying for use over time. And so I think interest is rent on money, and rents on property are the same. And so it seems as though whether it's like food for someone's immediate consumption, or whether it's money, that in either case we're prohibited from taking a profit on our brother who's in need for his immediate consumption. And so, yeah, I'd be grateful, Mr. Wiley, if you had any thoughts on differentiating
Sure.
taking profit versus interest taking, and I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, this goes back to our presuppositions about what these two parables mean, where some stewards invested and traded. And the scripture is very clear here. In the parable, it says that they traded and gained. Okay. Now, what is a trade? A transaction is a kind of thing that is free. People trade their excess for someone else's excess, and both parties are benefited and are wealthier as a result of the exchange. That's just the way it works. If they weren't both satisfied and both wealthier, they wouldn't make an exchange. Well, in the cases of the righteous stewards, the scripture is very clear here, the parable is very clear that they earned profit by trade or by commerce. And so that's contrasted with just putting it in the bank and earning usury, which is condemned in all of the scriptures, and it isn't repealed in this passage. I think there's a very big difference. I engage in commerce all the time. I mean, we have a very large business. Well, it's very large for a small business. We have 230 employees, pretty good turnover, and we make profits. But we do it by trades. Other people in every instance can believe that it will be benefited by entering a trade. They won't become a servant to the seller. They'll be more free as a result of the transaction, or they wouldn't do it. So it's a categorical difference, commerce and earning an increase based on a trade versus an obligation. And let's see how this works out in society. If one person engages in usury in a whole nation of 300 and some million people, you wouldn't even know it. But if 300 million people engage in usury, what would be the effect of this? Well, people would be pledging property to pay the interest and the principal they received. But if you don't have an elastic currency like Keynes would want you to have, if you have a hard currency that has substance, that has weight and can be measured and can be located in time and space, then there won't be enough currency to pay all of the usury that was quote unquote loaned. And so there'd be certain amount of foreclosure necessary in order for successful people to get enough currency to pay both the usury and the principal. Well, this would lead to foreclosures on a number of people. and the property then would flow into the moneylender's hands because they were put up as collateral. And the moneylenders then would have more wealth to lend out more money. And eventually your nation, if usury is widespread, it will not work mathematically. Eventually your nation will run out of currency to pay all of the principal and the usury that's being demanded. And you'll have a collapse. And even when we had hard money in our country every 40 years, we had a boom and a bust cycle, and that's why we had it. Well, Keynes comes along and says, well, we need elastic currency. We just need to invent money out of thin air so that we don't have a revolution.
Yeah.
And that's what they're doing now. And so now the situation is that not only ourselves, and I believe this is God's judgment, he's going, you don't want to obey me? Well, let's try it out, see how it works for you. Right now, our national debt, what is it, 38 trillion, 39 trillion,
Yeah,
something like that
close to
by
40.
now. It is about 40 by now. And let me ask you, gentlemen, I know this is a personal question, but let me ask you, have you borrowed anything from the government? You really can't think of it, can you? Most of the people I talk to aren't borrowing from the government, right?
I know I owe the government.
Yeah, you owe somebody else's debt, not your own. Like,
well, and I know,
but this is where a nation ends up when you don't obey God's law. Pretty soon, you'll have debts that are imposed upon you by force at gunpoint. Mm-hmm. You'll have debts that you are required to pay, even though you didn't even borrow anything, and you'll have a currency that is worthless. And it only has value between your ears. You can't even put it on a scale and weigh it. And there is no magic currency that can support the continued practice of usury and compound interest. It is mathematically unsustainable. Mm-hmm. It is not only criminal, but also unsustainable. It's wrong because it's criminal, but it's also, I can demonstrate how it's completely unsustainable. I mean, just look at what the Fed's got going now. They have no way out of this jam. They can't increase the interest rates. Some people think, you increase the interest rates and the society will become more stable and people want currency. Well, people want currency at an increased interest rate because they want to make money off money. Yeah. It's the same thing. And it's still going to be mathematically unpayable. Well, I'm sorry for getting on a rant like that.
No, that's okay. We need to bring this in for a landing because I'm sure you guys we're coming up the end of the hour here, and I'm sure you guys got meetings coming up. But David, I'll just give you a last comment. I will say, Mr. Wiley, I do very much appreciate the distinction that you're trying to make between usury and commerce. I think that's a really good distinction that needs to be made, which is what I'm, I guess, trying to make between usury and some sort of lawful interest. That I'm trying to make a commerce distinction there and all that. David, any last comments, thoughts?
No, I just say I very much appreciate this discussion. The issues of debt in our society and are, I guess, in all of our hands, and the impact that has on young men who are trying to get started and develop families and, have dwellings to live in. I mean, it's very oppressive, the level of debt, even to be able to get a job or an education. So, I'm very honored to be able to participate in a discussion like this. And I'm very open to be corrected by the scriptures if I have any. There's no future for me to be wrong about something, okay, and to resist God. I have no future in that. Amen.
Mr. Reece, any final thoughts?
Thank you for the honor of being on here, Mr. Wiley. It was an honor to meet you. I really appreciate your efforts at rigor about the application of the law of God and being careful to seek to guard the limits there and to not let human autonomy go beyond what God has given. Right, our law needs to be aligned with the law of God, and so I think that if what I'm saying does not follow from the text, it ought not to be believed. And so what I want to leave out as a kind of a main thought is when we think about the idea of being able to make deals that take time and to be able to use money on capital goods, things like buying a house or buying a business, that on a most basic level, a type of lending that does occur sometimes, or what typically referred to now as seller notes, where you can say, I want to buy a house from you. And you say, well, I'd like to sell this house. I say, I don't have the money to buy it right now. Can I make it in payments? And that sort of makes the other party into a bank or that. And they could say, well, the money's more valuable to me now than it is tomorrow. And so, there's some sort of time value on that. So interest being accrued on a deal like that, those questions, the time value of capital, I think comes in at the most basic form there. So I think the idea of commercial credit, where you're somebody you're selling with, they want to buy from you, and then this idea of the timeline of payment, you end up with the value of money today versus money tomorrow in some of those transactions, and I think that the idea of commercial lending is most clearly seen when you think about that time value of having the stuff today versus a later time. And those transactions that are meant for the gain of both parties is something where I think that it seems most clear. And so I think that when we're looking at there's clearly lawful ability to do commerce, and the ability to do commerce involves the ability, I think, to trade time of things, and that includes the time of labor, right? So you can get wages for doing your own work or selling your time, and so selling the time of property, those seem to be necessary inferences. And again, I'm open to correction and discussion about those things too. This is my effort to seek to understand principles for dominion and to try to tie things together. So that's what I would posit.
Gentlemen, thank you for your time so much. I appreciate it. You can follow David Reece. You can actually connect him at reecefund.com. He runs investmentreecefund.com. And of course, David Wiley, thank you for joining us too. His book, New and Ancient Justice. I'm sure you can buy it on Amazon and all that stuff. Yes. So thank you, gentlemen, for coming on the show. Thank you guys for tuning in to Water Break. Crosspolitic One-on-One with Gabe Wrench. Thank you.